Good afternoon. Welcome to the session. Thank you for attending the session today. I'm Aditya Kudumala. I'm a partner principal in our life sciences practice. I lead our life sciences innovation, AI, blockchain, emerging tech. And today I have the honor of co-presenting with the Pfizer team, who are leaders in their own rights in terms of building some new, very innovative solutions, technologies, or capabilities. I want to introduce Vitaly Dobin, who leads leader within the Pfizer Health and Impact Group. We have Josh Rageman, who's a leader within Pfizer's Analytics, plus also AI COE. Along with him is Abe Thomas, who's also a leader within the Pfizer Analytics and AI COE. So today, we're going to be talking about patient centricity. We're talking about real-world data, evidence, cognitive insights. All of these are very important, relevant topics. I'm pretty sure some of you in this room, not only you guys are doing it today, but also want to hear more of what's happening in the industry itself. And the use and the importance of these capabilities is evolving, and it continues to evolve as we speak. In addition to that, we're also seeing a whole proliferation of data. We are seeing advancements in the technologies or analytics capabilities, and also the regulators are more and more in tune with these capabilities and leveraging them for their use in their decision-making process. And when we talk about the real-world evidence and data, today we're going to do two things. One, we'll share with you some of the snippets from our survey, Deloitte Annual Real-World Evidence Survey. I know it's a very meaty topic. There's a lot to cover, but in 60 minutes, we'll do our best job of condensing it. Hopefully, we'll leave some time for Q&A. We'll share some of the snippets. Second, we'll showcase the journey that Pfizer has embarked on. It's a truly amazing story. I've been working with these folks for a number of years. I'm truly amazed by the amount of work these guys have put into it, the accomplishments and all, and hope you too appreciate the progress and the future that they're laying the groundwork for. So when we talk about real-world evidence, this clicker has a problem. They told me that, so I'm going to try again. So when we talk about the real-world evidence data, the context here is anything healthcare data that is generated outside of the random clinical trials. So anything, data can be electronic medical records, genomic data sets, patient-generated data sets, whether it's from sensors or things like that. That's the context of it. The second is evidence is nothing but the insights that are generated from these data, and you leverage that insights for a number of applications or use. We'll talk about it a lot in the session today, but it's more to do with whether you're demonstrating the value of your product and/or you are meeting the regulatory requirements and so on and so forth, right? And more we are seeing the industry as a whole increasingly using this data and the insights from it for their use as such. But we have a lot more questions to ask. Are we making the right investments? Are we making the choices from a technology perspective? Are we having the right governance model, technology, talent? All those questions are big questions that everybody's asking, and hopefully we'll touch upon some of them through the story that we'll share later today. But again, open for some discussions later on as we go through the presentation as such. Okay. So one of the key, we wanted to share about 3 or 4, I would say, snippets from our survey. One was when we did the survey in 2017, that was the first Deloitte annual RWE survey. And compared to what we did today, this year, 2018, as you can see, there are about twice as many respondents highlighting the importance at the executive level for the use of this data and insights for the use within the company itself. And we see the trend increasing from now to 2020. So we are starting to, not only the companies embracing it, but it is becoming the fabric of their organization as such. Out of the respondents that we talked to, some of the other insights that they highlighted, over 90% of them are already not only building these capabilities, but also in various degrees of maturity of leveraging these capabilities for their use, right? And if we can break it down even further, where some of the capabilities are very mature, but they're mature for certain functions that they have optimized it, but everybody is on a journey to create these capabilities that can be applied across the entire product lifecycle. That's the goal that they have, the vision that they have, all of these organizations. And hopefully, when we do the survey next year or 2 years from now, we will see the pie chart changing quite drastically from 45% to more in terms of how they would leverage it across the product lifecycle itself. And the other lens that we want to show it to you is like, what are the, as I said earlier, how are we leveraging this for today and then future? Right now, as you see the focus of leveraging these insights, when we did the survey, what the key topics that came out was, how are the treatments performing for certain populations? How are we monitoring patient safety? How are we looking at disease burden and all those? Those topics will be relevant today and also tomorrow. But more and more, as we've been talking to the leaders within these organizations, the focus would also shift to, can I leverage these insights to do design a better clinical trials, do clinical trial optimization, do value-based contracts, and also, can we leverage these data sets to expand on the label, the usage of the product, and also for my regulatory submissions. So we're seeing more and more adoption of these data and insights for different functions within the organization as such. So, and last data point we want to share before I bring the Pfizer team on board is, more than 70% of these respondents highlighted that they are building these capabilities in-house. Again, as I said earlier, various degrees of maturity, but I'm really excited to share the capabilities that Pfizer has built. And it's been a long journey since 2012, Josh, I believe, right? 2012 that they've been building this out. And it's a phenomenal story, and I hope you also will enjoy this in the next few minutes. So I'll call upon Josh Reisman, who will come and speak about the journey that they embarked since 2012. Abe will talk about how they made it happen. And then Vitaly will talk about what the business impact that they're having today and also future.
Great. Thank you. All right. Let's see if I can do this.
You have to click it twice.
Twice.
Yeah.
OK. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Reisman. As Aditya said, I work for Pfizer. I lead a technology organization focused on trying to figure out how we can leverage data, analytics, and increasingly AI to drive our vision of creating a healthier world. We're really happy to be able to share our story with you today. We hope you'll find it interesting. We found it very exciting, and yeah, we're just happy to be here. I have to remind you before we begin that this is neither an endorsement of a specific technology or any direction. And the things that you'll hear from us are views and opinions that may or may not align with Pfizer Inc. at any given time. Now that we've got that out of the way. So where do we begin to tell this story? I began, and I think these are new slides. We're going to test drive them. You'll let me know afterwards how they work. I think the best way to begin this story is to talk a little bit about the changing perspectives, our changing perspectives on healthcare data. So when I started with Pfizer in 2006, we were largely, I would argue, focused on internal events that we generated, whether it was experiments on the benchtop or clinical trials that we ran. Everything was very inwardly focused. Over time, and some of this was driven by technology innovation, some policy like the HITECH Act here in the US, we began to shift or widen our lens and began to look much more broadly at the world around us, such that years ago, we were lucky if we had 100, maybe 1,000 patients that we could look at longitudinally and try to understand things like disease progression or treatment patterns. Now we can choose across hundreds of millions of patient lives, and all de-identified, of course, and looking and finding patterns. The data itself has changed. So we moved from the sort of traditional, very structured output to incorporating all sorts of new data streams, whether it was streams from devices. I'm still an old school watch guy. I don't know why I'm pointing to my actigraphy device. Whether it was devices, whether it was images, whether it was healthcare events coming out of electronic medical records. These were all relatively new to us. And of course, we had things like publications and transcriptions of our interactions with patients and providers. So we have all of these new elements that we can look at to make decisions. And the decisions themselves have changed. So in years past, we supported very directive kind of analyses. Show me this, show me that. But increasingly, the question is more, what does the data say? Okay, that's really different. And if you think about it in the commercial context, how many of you have a healthcare background? Just a show of hands. Okay. All right, so it's a mixed crowd. All right, so those of you who've worked in healthcare and worked for a big pharma in the past, no surprise, we invested a lot of money and a lot of time to understand our brand performance. There were two metrics that we looked at. John Wallman here in the front row could give us a dissertation about them. It's new NRXs and TRXs. How many new scripts were written for patients? What's your overall market share? Interesting stuff, important stuff. But what I would argue has happened over the last 5 years is we've been caught in this tremendous updraft of expectation of the data. So not only do we have all sorts of new streams of information, but the expectation is that we're going to do something with it. And what does that look like? At first glance, it's simply understanding patient treatment patterns. For some conditions, some patients will go to the clinic 6, 7 times before they're diagnosed. Other patients will go 1 or 2 times and come away with the same diagnosis. Why does that happen? How does that correlate to outcomes? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? These are questions that we're expected to be able to answer now. Going further, we want to understand the patient's behavior themselves and how that might influence outcomes. Who are the patients who are really going to adhere to a medication? Who aren't? Also disease progression. We've begun to understand and get very good at expecting that we'll understand patient subpopulations, and that each, with this whole idea of N of 1, well, we try to get there in our understanding of disease. But the real change, I would argue, and what drove us to this journey to the cloud was the idea that we wanted to leave the dashboard behind. We wanted to get to a point where we could bring insights in vivo. So how can we, in real time, influence positive patient outcomes with all of this information? And that's a completely different shift from what we had done in the past. And so we had fits and starts with this. Our move to the cloud really coincided with 2016. So anybody familiar with that banner? About the same time that we were starting on this journey, I had the opportunity to go to Tokyo. And if you've ever go to Tokyo, there's a district called Shinjuku where there's a lot of corporate buildings and government buildings. And there were these huge banners to get people motivated to think about what Tokyo 2020 needed to look like in order to support their winning bid for the Summer Games they had just won. And so it got me thinking, what are some of the macro factors that we were going to have to take into account as we made this journey? And what, if any of them, had anything to do with the cloud? So we had our own Pfizer 2020. That's about as close as I can get to Olympic rings. There were obvious macro factors that we had to make adjustments for, right? We had technology innovation, this idea that we could buy technology by the pound or by the minute, the idea that we were going to see, and we're now seeing, digital assistants pop up in all sorts of aspects in our lives. Just at Pfizer alone, we'll have 6 digital assistants focused on patients and healthcare providers, these little chatbots and the like. And we knew that was coming. But we also saw this idea of external collaboration. So how many of you remember the Cancer Moonshot, right? This was a great endeavor where we were bringing stakeholders were being brought together that previously didn't have much to do with one another. Providers and payers and pharma, all forming these sort of syndicates around data, collecting it, generating it, collecting it, enriching it, and getting much better at mining it for better outcomes. And we saw that was something that was only going to continue. And we knew what was happening here in the US, or perhaps Japan and a few markets in the European Union, was going to continue to grow. So we had to grapple with all of that and this data, the proliferation. And so what do we do? Well, the answer was kind of obvious, right? I mean, it's obvious now. 2 years ago, perhaps not so obvious. You could have had a few dissenters saying, the cloud, it's a fad. I heard somebody still describe it as a fad. Clearly, it's not a fad, right? And so we said, well, what could we do? How can we use all of these technologies to create a more data-centric or patient-centric data platform? And so we started a project called Athena. And Athena was all about taking a 100% cloud-based approach to how we pull together disparate sources of information to guide our decision-making at any given time, and doing it in such a way that we could extend. So if there was a new bit of data that we hadn't seen before, fine, great. We can figure out how to store it. We can figure out how to mine it. If there's a new algorithm that we want to take advantage of, or a new framework, well, great. We knew that we wanted to be in the cloud to do that, and perhaps 2 or 3 clouds. And so today, we've got a 600 billion healthcare event repository. That doesn't include the tens of millions of patient interaction and provider interactions that we transcribe, and then we can use various NLP techniques to mine. All of this is in an ecosystem that we can bring external collaborators in and out of. We can do all sorts of novel data sharing that we simply weren't able to do. And we're able to, more importantly, power decisions that matter, that help us prioritize where we make investments in our drug portfolio, all the way through to making value propositions clear to patients and providers and stakeholders. This is what our drugs do for, or this is what our medications do for these types of patients, to powering how we engage with those patients, to bringing it all the way home to say, okay, it's not enough just to have a great product. It's got to be a great product that's actually benefiting the patient. And all of that is being driven, or a lot of that is being driven today from this platform. And we think we're really well positioned, certainly better than we've ever been before, for future demand. So that's sort of conceptually what we've done, and that's sort of the conceptual part of the journey. What I'm going to do now is hand it over to Abe Thomas, who's going to talk in more detail about sort of what we did and how we did it. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, folks. My name is Abe Thomas. Josh, thank you for that. So let's get into what we did and how we did it. All right. So in 2017, Pfizer was facing an urgency, a major issue, right? We were expecting a massive influx of patient healthcare events, similar to what Aditi was talking about. But before I describe exactly what the issue was, let's go back in time to 2014. All right. So in 2014, when we kind of started on this journey, we were processing around 40 billion healthcare events on an annual basis. This was our annual throughput. At that time, it was a fairly sizable amount of data. And over time, of course, I got to move over here, I guess. All right, there we go. Over time, this volume increased. And by the time we got to 2017, we had a substantial increase in healthcare events. We were processing around a 10x factor over where we started. And in 2017, we were around 90% capacity in our platforms. So that includes our database platforms, our SFTP servers, our NAS, and so on. So we had to make a decision. And we kind of saw this coming in 2016. We realized that at the growth rate of around 200 billion records a year, which is what we're seeing, we're going to be maxed out fairly soon. So in 2017, we thought, okay, if we get another 200 billion records or so, we're not going to have any processing power to actually ingest it or even analyze it or even load it. So in 2016, as Josh alluded to, we made the conscious decision to actually move to the cloud. And in late 2017, we did make the move. We started initializing our cloud-based infrastructure. Now, you can call us good or call us lucky, because what happened next is, in 2018, by Q3, we hit 1.7 trillion healthcare events that we were ingesting in. This includes EMR data, claims data, newly licensed data, international data. It was a massive influx of healthcare events that we were processing monthly, quarterly, what have you. By the end of this year, we are on track, and I think we already hit this mark, to process 2 trillion healthcare events. Now, this supports the 600 billion because this is throughput, and we had to churn through this much data in order to get that 600 billion active healthcare events. So fairly significant. Had we not moved to the cloud, we would have had an issue. So if you ask me, we were good in the sense we made the right decision. We were lucky in that our timing was almost perfect. We moved to the cloud late 2017, first quarter 2018, we got hit with these new data sets. So on-prem or in the cloud, right? That was a decision that we were facing. And for those of you who have been through a data center migration, data center expansion, you know how painful it is, right? You're on calls about server migrations, about trucks hitting the docks, about cables being crossed, and so on and so forth. And just from a cost perspective, right, we were looking at around a 3x factor if we decided to invest heavily in our infrastructure from a database platform perspective, NAS, SFTP, analytics, Python, R, you name it. It was fairly significant. Moving to the cloud, however, gave us a flexibility to expand on demand, right, to spin up instances as needed at a much lower cost factor. So the cost factor differential itself is fairly significant, let alone the capabilities of moving to the cloud provider for us. So that was a fairly easy decision for us to make. All right, let's go back to 2014 and our architecture back then. A very simple diagram. In 2014, this was great, right? Very simple but great. We had an SFTP server where vendors could upload their data to. We had a NAS, right? We had ETL. We had, at that point in time, the greatest MPP parallel system that I could think of, right? Users were using server-based analytic products and client-based tools. And it was great in 2014 because in 2011, our vendors were shipping us hard drives, right? 2011 and 2012. They would ship us hard drives via FedEx. We'd have to track it, manually mount it on a Unix server, copy the files over to file server. We had SaaS users querying these files. I mean, the ingestion process alone took multiple weeks. That came down to multiple days in 2014. So this was great in 2014. 2016, as Josh mentioned, we started implementing a smaller ecosystem in the cloud. We were expanding our data science usage, so we had deep learning environment out there, analytics clusters, and so on. It was connected, but not cohabited, if you know what I mean. We would take data as needed, move it to the cloud, do our analysis, and so on. But in 2017, what was great in 2014 was reaching end of life. It was almost not that great anymore. So in 2018, fast forward 12 to 18 months, we are now completely 100% in the cloud. Our SFTP servers are gone. And along with that, I remember back then, we had to arrange with our vendors as to when they can land their data because all our vendors could not upload the data at the same time. That is gone. Now we're using S3 buckets, of course. So our SFTP servers are gone. Our NAS servers are gone. Today, I don't really care about how much data you're uploading. I don't really care when you upload the data, right? The data gets uploaded to S3. From there, we ingest it into an Amazon Redshift cluster. That data ingestion process has become very simple. We used to do a lot of ETL, emphasis on the T. Today, it's primarily EL. It's extract and load. There's a very little transformation that goes on, partly because the cluster we have is fairly powerful enough so we don't have to do a lot of transformation to the data sets. Above and beyond that, you'll notice that our deep learning, our analytics cluster, we have microservices and API search and Elastic. That's all integrated really well in a cohesive environment. So all of our users, whether they're data scientists, engineers, statisticians, they're all in this ecosystem working on a common set of data, right, without having to worry about spinning out different servers on their own or using other tools. And of course, security is paramount for Pfizer, so it's all in the VPC, it's in the cloud, it's all encrypted data and so on. So this is all great. So let's talk about some results. So we've been in the cloud for about 11 months now, actually. And we noticed some very significant results that are very positive and very exciting, actually. So I'll talk about it from an operational and from a technical perspective. Oops, that didn't work. There we go. All right. So year over year, from 2017 to 2018, we've had a net increase of 23% in the volume of SQL queries. So these are all ad hoc queries. There are no canned queries running in this ecosystem. We cannot tune for a canned report. These are queries being run in support of a study. These are being executed by Python or R, SAS, raw SQL, Tableau dashboards, what have you. They're all very ad hoc. We have to support a 23% increase in our queries. Now, what's interesting is we've had more users come on this platform since we went to the cloud. And it's not because Pfizer has gone out and hired a whole lot more statisticians. It is because business groups who used to work in silos in the past are now coming out of the shadows and actually moving their analytics to this ecosystem, and many of them are bringing along their real-world data assets as well. So we're getting more users, more data, folks coming together, and that's the new user base we have. Query performance, if I can get this to work, is paramount. We have a soft SLA of 90% of all queries, ad hoc or whatnot, need to execute in under 30 seconds. End of Q3, we hit 97% of all our queries are hitting our marks, our Redshift cluster, and completing in under 30 seconds. And the key thing there is that is without having to transform the data. These queries, in the past, we've had to denormalize our tables, right, because the queries just wouldn't perform. Now it's just E&L. We're loading the data as is. Our users are being trained, best practices, how to write appropriate queries, and so on. But the performance is great. And of course, this is going against a 416% increase in data volumes, right? This is a very large cluster, a lot of healthcare data, and is supporting this increased usage as well. Time to load. This was a really key metric for us. Back in 2012, it would take 2 weeks to load a certain set of data. In 2014, 2016, that came down to 39 hours, roughly. That same data set can now be loaded in hours in the new cluster. It's very quick, it's very simple, and this is the time from landing in our S3 bucket to making it live in the data mart. This is a 78% reduction, which means from an operational perspective, our operational footprint from a manpower is exactly the same as it was 4 years ago. Despite this increase in volume, despite the increase in usage and the technology stack, it is the exact same footprint. And lastly, if I get this to work, obviously the cost to process and to store and have a healthcare event available for analytics has come down as well. And of course, cost is always important. And I fully expect this number to actually come down. This being our first year, we've optimized to the best we can. Our journey has just begun. I'm fairly certain that number will come down. I'm fairly certain that our time to load will come down as well as we begin to work with our vendors closer to get these numbers to where they are. But the key is, behind each one of these metrics is a query, is a study being done to further patients' lives and patient health. And that's what's key here, right? These metrics are all cool. The technology is cool. But unless there's a significant business impact, unless we're moving towards Pfizer's goal of a healthier world, it does not make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to pass it on to Vitaly, who will share some of our success stories.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Vitaly Dobin. I'm part of the team that is the business owner of the environment, and part of the reason that Josh and Abe had many sleepless nights over the past 5 years or so. I have only one slide. Unfortunately, a few other slides legal did not approve. May have something to do with the fact that I sent them too late, but hopefully I can talk through it. Before I go to this slide, I think I'll start with where we started. So as Aditi mentioned, real-world data is getting a lot of attention. Originally around, before it started getting all this attention, real-world data was primarily used for health economic and outcome research. And for those that are outside of pharma, this is a type of research that's taking place right before products go into commercialization, so right before approval. And they're primarily used for discussions with the payers to secure reimbursement. And those type of studies and analysis, they usually take a year or even more than a year. So usually the process would be a business team would meet, they would talk about what kind of analysis, what kind of studies we want to run. We would identify a few data sources, we would run some feasibility accounts, we would go into contracting and legal discussions. Maybe 6 months later, we would get the data set in-house. We would have our clinical stats team build patient cohorts. Then our stats team would run analysis. So a year later, we would get the analysis. So around 2013, when Pfizer decided to create an internal capability around real-world data and real-world evidence, that's when our team was created. And that's when we launched the first data environment. And so we built a number of data partnerships with external data vendors, and we built an on-premise environment that Josh and Abe mentioned earlier. And that allowed us to eliminate all of the delays around contracting and legal. But we still had the issue was still, we were able to build better analysis because we could validate some of our assumptions, run some of the visibility counts as we were working on designing the analysis. But then we still would have to spend 3 months or so building patient cohorts, running the analysis. And by the way, if we would have a question that's slightly different than what originally designed, then we would have to go back and rerun all of those analyses. So plus this approach is not very scalable. So the more questions we want to answer, the more clinical statisticians and data scientists we would need to hire. So really the only way, not only the one of the ways we want to address this problem is by building an analytics environment that would sit on top of the data environment. And that's really when we saw a big uptake in the utilization of our data environment. And so by having this analytics environment, we were able to build self-service analytic tools that would allow our customers across the board, across Pfizer, to be self-sufficient. So our big goal for our team was to enable real-world data to be used across the entire product lifecycle, from early research to development, commercialization, and through all the way to post-marketing safety surveillance. And again, by building these analytic tools, we were able to achieve this. And for example, on the research side, we build analytic tools, self-service assumption analytic tools that allow to identify mathematical needs. And also, there are many, many times questions around patient characteristics. So we oftentimes want to focus on patients at the highest risk, or patients that consume that are highest cost patients. Again, we don't need to go through a lot of this back and forth with our clinical stats teams or our stats teams, because we have the tools that researchers can use on their own to answer their questions, and they can do that in an iterative way, so they don't have to kind of spend time really carefully designing all the studies prior to just to ask a simple question. On the clinical trial side and development side, we're helping clinical trial teams to design better clinical trials by doing what-if analysis, designing better inclusion-exclusion criteria, so looking at what kind of impact on the potential study population various inclusion-exclusion criteria might have prior to kind of finalizing the design of the studies. On the commercial side, again, real-world data is very useful to assess the market size, which helps with forecasting, with market, with business development, and also it's very useful to understand treatment patterns, how patients are taking medicine, how long they're staying on treatment, what medicine they're switching to from the initial medicine, and so forth. And then on the safety surveillance side, we enable the safety team to build standard cohorts, as we call them, that are being continuously monitored to make sure that continuously monitored for safety events. So again, I think over time what we're seeing is the initial years, most of the use our data environment was getting it through direct users. So users that were very comfortable with writing SAS code, SQL code. But over the past couple of years, as we introduced these analytic tools, we're seeing a big shift in users coming through these analytic tools. And that's exactly the type of shift that we want to see, because it enables us to do analytics at scale, whereas we don't need to hire 100 statisticians just because we have 100 more business users asking questions of the data platform. So I'll stop with that, and I'll invite any questions.
Thanks, Vital.
Sure.
So while folks are lining up for the questions, Josh, I'm going to start off with you on a question.
I thought we were supposed to move our chairs. Sorry.
No, move it.
I can't be the only one that's moving my chairs.
All right.
Okay, fire away.
All right. So we're going to do a couple of things. So we have about 20-odd minutes right here. So we had a few questions that, based on the journey that we've been together, I want to delve a little bit deeper in some of the context behind the journey that we've been in. But apart from that, please, if you have any questions, I can't see the mic. There should be a mic around where you can ask questions, so we can also have an interactive dialogue if you have anything that you want to delve further into it. So Josh, it's been an amazing journey. 2012, we've been there since day one with you guys throughout and we've gone through the ups and downs. But the truly amazing things, I know you dealt some of it as we went through the presentation, but what were the key learnings and challenges or opportunities that suddenly it was a mind shift change. At least I can see from 2012 to 2018, I think you alluded to, there's a sea change of mindset you've been able to accomplish, but that took a lot of effort within the enterprise. So do you want to share something, both from a mindset perspective, adoption perspective, any other key learnings that this team or this group can take away with?
Sure. I can start, and I'll ask you guys to chip in. So first off, we're at AWS reInvent. We are partnering with Deloitte on a presentation. So I first have to say partnerships were key, right? You've got to have the right people advising you, the right expertise. You only have so many of the world's smartest people in the room at any given time, so you have to look externally as well. I think one of the keys is we were reflecting earlier, and I attribute the line to Henry Ford, but apparently there's some discussion about whether Henry Ford ever said what I believe he said, and clearly I'm old, but I'm not that old. What we didn't do specifically is set out to build a faster horse. Right, so the Henry Ford line, but if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse instead of a car. So what we tried to take it upon ourselves to say, okay, where do we see this going, and where do we see the opportunities? And as part of that, we didn't try to win over the world. This story is a fantastic one on many levels. For those who cared about the dollars and cents, we have a great story. We literally bent that cost curve that Abe showed you to a degree that I didn't think was possible. For those who wanted to be innovative, so we've got an oncology business unit, and it's a great space. We've got great products, we believe, and we believe we can do great things on behalf of patients. They are eager to try new things. So for them, the idea that they could, experiment with GPU-based, data science, they were all in. On the other hand, so they got excited, and that excitement kind of cascaded. At the same time, we made sure for those folks who were on the more clinical development side, where it wasn't innovation that was important to them, it was certainty. They wanted to run their analyses, and they wanted those analyses to execute flawlessly within the time that they had allowed. All we did was make it a little bit faster, but it was a win. So it was a combination of thinking big, starting small, targeting our value proposition, remembering that this is the part that's my opinion. We're all motivated by self-interest, right? So there had to be something in it for the constituents, and we tried to keep that in mind as we put together this story and told the story internally. Anything else come to mind, you guys?
Yeah, from a business learning, or from a learnings perspective, from the technology bend, I think the one thing that technologists do that is probably not so great is we get excited about technology for technology's sake, right? This is a cool new machine learning model, it's GPU. You can't evangelize to the business the latest and greatest technology. Their eyes are going to close. What you have to do is kind of build that bridge, understand where they want to go, right, and then bring up the technology that will help them get there. And I think for us, that was really crucial, and that Josh mentioned the oncology group. I mean, they were, for us, that bridge, because they knew where they wanted to go. They were willing to take this leap of faith with us, and they were not scared of technology. So having that group be one of our co-evangelists and saying, hey, this is where we're going to go, they're doing it, and this is what they're seeing, was a big lesson for us. I think another thing from a technology perspective, just from implementation, is it's not going to go as expected, right? Moving to the cloud, it sounds cool. it is work. It is hard work, and you will face the unexpected. You can plan the plan and plan the plan. The plan's a plan, but you got to be ready to scrap that plan at a moment's notice. We did that a couple of times as we learned new things that just didn't work out. Whether it's, oops, we used the wrong encryption key, back all the data out, put it back in. Oops, we forgot to test SSL in a couple of platforms, run all our test cases again. Whatever it might be, there are going to be learnings that you'll have to go through, and you have to be willing and able and to be agile, really, and to handhold the business as they make that journey with you. So those are two learnings from
I'll add one. It's, I think everybody knows, build it and they will not come. So that's exactly what happened, I think, with us initially at least. So we thought we were going to launch this data platform and this analytic tools, and everyone is just going to jump up and down, and there'll be a huge line for people waiting to sign up to use these tools, and it didn't happen. And really only through hard work, through repetition, and doing community practices, or each of the kind of businesses or people across different business lines, different functional lines as well, presenting their own use case. So not us talking about their use cases, having them present their own use cases. I think that carries much more power. And I guess one more I'll mention is kind of the cultural shock in a way. I still remember when I first joined the team and I was talking to somebody in stats, and it was a pretty high person, and she said I would never put my signature under any analysis that took less than 3 months, right? And it just doesn't work this way in the real life. But that's kind of the mindset we had to wrestle with at the beginning. So I think just the big mind shift from like 5 years ago to now is just amazing.
That's great. And just to click on one more topic, how was the whole? It's a complex environment, Pfizer as such, but can you double click on the talent and the governance and how you guys overcame that? I know you talked about silos being brought down and all, but I think that also had a very big net impact within the enterprise itself. And even the new strategy that's being laid out looks like forward-looking based on all the things that you guys have been doing. Any comments on how, from a governance perspective and also from a talent perspective, you guys were able to groom this up over the course of 5-6 years?
So, so talent is always tough. Unfortunately, pharma is not the first place people, data scientists think about when they think about looking for a new job. So it is tough. So we had to kind of repurpose some of the statisticians, so make them comfortable using other tools than SAS. So that's one thing. Another thing, still bring younger people from colleges fresh out of school that have higher aspirations, and they like healthcare, like making a difference, like doing more than just optimizing, junk email, things of that nature. So bringing those kind of people, but then it comes with the pain of teaching them about the healthcare data, which might take a little bit of time to get used to. That thing just takes time.
I think the governance play is an interesting question, right? So everybody wants a data lake now. I mean, actually, that was last year. I don't know what everybody's going to want for 2019, but certainly in 2018, when we were looking at it from 2017, everybody was hoping that Santa would bring them a data lake. We can now indulge that, right? We can, yes, you want a data lake, fantastic. We can do that. We've got all the pieces and parts. It stitches, and they stitch very well together. And oh, by the way, every November we come out to Las Vegas and we find out about new pieces and parts that we can take advantage of immediately. This has never happened before, and in some ways it may not be especially healthy for an organization that struggles with governance and prioritization, because it allows us not to have to make choices, because we don't have to make these huge capital outlays anymore. We don't have to make these huge 18-month plans anymore. We can indulge everybody's ask, and it's actually very well suited to an organization like Pfizer, who prides itself on its science. We're a bunch of experimenters. We like to explore. And our shift to the cloud has fed that and made that easy to do, and do in a way that is relatively low risk, low cost. And we're really excited about where we think it will take us, specifically from a patient perspective.
Right. And would it be far stretch to say that what innovation and what push you guys did from this program has propelled the use of cloud within the enterprise? How much has that impacted Pfizer as a whole?
Candidly, I'd say the organization is starting to wake up. This is a tremendous story. I mean, if you go back a couple of slides, you see those operational metrics. These are not things that people have come to expect from IT, right? Usually it takes roughly, 18 months and anywhere between $500,000 and $5 million. And at some point, you may even realize that, the project's gone off the rails, right? It happens to small companies, it happens to big companies, it certainly happens to government. But in this case, we were able to do something completely revolutionary within 12 months. I mean, actually within 6 months. And we're bending these curves that we simply, couldn't have imagined before. I don't think people understand the magnitude of what we've done. And candidly, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. We're waiting for our Redshift environment is probably one of the bigger ones around. We're waiting for the wheels to come off the cart, and it hasn't. So we still talk very quietly about it. But we're really excited, and we think this is indicative of what we can expect and hopefully what you can expect as well.
Great. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
What was the learning curve for your engineering team? So how long did it take them to come up to speed on that technology where you felt comfortable for them to manage it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You might want to repeat it.
Yeah, so the question was, what was the change management? What was the transition from an engineering perspective? Did I get that right? Interesting in many ways. So we have found that in certain areas we can get by with far less. So the denormalization of data that was coming at us just so that we can execute queries effectively, we don't have to do that anymore. So that's a huge chunk of work that's out. The constant tuning, we don't do that anymore, right? So we're able to do much more with less. The roles have changed, and candidly, it's fed the engineers are now, I believe, invigorated to some extent because they get to take advantage of all these new technologies, and it feeds the engineer's mindset. So there's all sorts of opportunities where we may have been shackled to technology choices that we made 5 years ago. Now, something new. I get in trouble all the time. I describe us as promiscuous from a technology perspective, right? We used to make these long-term relationships with companies and technologies, and we'd commit to them, and 5 years later, maybe we'd revisit them, and then we'd probably decide, it's too difficult to re-platform, and so we now we're much more nimble, and our engineers are excited. It is a different set of skills, and we are finding that we've got to go out and recruit from different places. What we're hopeful is that if you've been working for a digital company for a while and you want to come solve real big challenges, right? I mean, the one we always point to is there's a certain cardiovascular condition. About 5 million, research indicates about 5 million people in the US have it. About 1 million go undiagnosed every year. Of that 1 million, research suggests that you're at 3 to 4 times more likelihood of a stroke. Wouldn't it be cool if you could build a system that would help accelerate the diagnosis of the asymptomatic patient? We hope that fires up our engineering crew and helps us attract more traditional software engineers when, candidly, we had gotten away from that. We had been using COTS off-the-shelf software, shackled to old technology. It kind of worked, and we went with it, but it's not nearly as exciting, I think, as where we are today.
Right. And just to add on to that, what Abe was saying, so even the DevOps mentality, reuse, best practices, there's more conscientious decisions being made in terms of what to bring in, what to use, what to fail fast and move on. I think that I could see from the outside in, a culture shift has happened also within your group as you went through this journey too.
Yeah, there's simply no way we could have done it without transitioning to more of a platform approach. So we had historically taken a very bespoke kind of approach to projects. Now, we have people publishing services that are being used for things that they had no idea existed within our organization. And people on the other side are thrilled because they don't have to develop it. They can just take advantage of what's already there. And so I think it's been it's been exciting. It's been a little unsettling to some folks who were wed to some of these legacy technologies. But we don't, it's 12 months later, we don't run into that much anymore.
Cool. Yes, please.
You mentioned before that there was a learning gap with Redshift for your users that were running SQL queries, and I've seen that myself. How did you all handle that training gap?
Yeah, I have the secret weapon. His name is Abe. Abe.
No, so we work closely with Amazon up front. So as soon as we made the decision to move to Redshift, we had them come on site to our headquarters and basically hold sessions, walking through the difference between where we were today, the current architecture, what we're moving to, how you execute queries then, how we execute queries now, examples, and so on. Our operational team, the Deloitte folks, they were hardcore. I mean, they were great. The examples we would use, one thing we've learned is you never use abstract examples. You have to use code that they're generating that's taking them a day to execute and say, what if we could execute the same thing in 2 minutes and show them how it's done? If you teach them how to make their lives faster using their own code, they're more than happy to sit there for 2 hours and listen. If you're teaching them select star from blah, 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 they're not there anymore. So we did invest both from Amazon and from Pfizer's own team, and as Vitaly mentioned, we have a community of practices where we go over code, we go over snippets and show them how to do things differently. That said, it's still not easy. I mean, we've had some of the simplest SQL statements have brought down our cluster. We have interns. And a simple select star from extremely big table and write 5 of those in parallel because the first one is still churning can bring down your cluster. And that's a learning we had to go through. And that's a training exercise we have to go through and show them, hey, you just can't do that. Know what you want before you query it. And so part of the onboarding is that they have to go through a whole how can you use the data aspect. But we're also building how you can actually use it from a technology perspective as well. If you've never used Redshift, if you've never used this ecosystem, here's what you do, and here's how you do it, here's what you don't do. And they have to go through that training before they even get an account on the platform. So we're incorporating some of those kind of things as well.
Cool. Yes, please.
How do you monitor performance of your applications in the cloud?
That's a good question. So from a Redshift perspective, right, we have built our own custom dashboards that help us do that. We also have DBAs that have triggers and so on, so we know if there's an excessive number of waits or queues in the system. Our platform is 24/7. It's a global platform. However, concurrency isn't that big of a deal. So we do have active monitors in place. We're not fully there yet. It's something we're still working through and learning as we go. For the other platforms, whether it's the Python EC2 instances or deep learning or whatnot, I think that's still a work in progress. We have a platform team who's dedicated to looking at that and monitoring it. I don't know if they have anything fully built out. I mean, it's a journey we just started.
Yeah, I would say we've got the basics of the baseline instrumentation that every app should have. It's propagating that through all of our apps that is the challenge, and improving on that. So I'd love to know how you take that on. And part of the reason we come here in such numbers is to pick up from others, because there's nothing magical about our apps and monitoring that we couldn't learn from others. And we're a little bit farther behind than some of you who may be in financial services or retail.
Go ahead.
How difficult was it to convince your partners to let go of SFTP and start writing S3 buckets? And how did you sell that? Because when I think about our partners, that's a no. I second that.
Yeah. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, so our team deals with all of the data licensing, so I guess that's why I wanted me to answer that. But I think we've been talking to our data vendors for the longest time, even before we started this transition. We're talking to them about better ways of doing it. And cloud always came up. And at the end of the day, we also convinced them that it's better for them because it took effort on their side as well, not only on our side, to monitor the SFTP, creating accounts for us, for them. Some of them were shipping hard drives. Some of them still, I think one vendor still ships hard drives, so we had to ship it back. So I think it's just showing them that there's something in it for them as well. It's not only for us. And also, I think at least our data vendors, they're moving to the cloud as well, so that might have helped. So over the past 12 months, they've been moving there as well. So that helped also, I would say.
Cool. Somebody had a question.
I have a question on the consumption side. Because there was a mention that you don't transform anything, you're pretty much taking as extract and load. How do you ensure that the intimacy with the data is there with the data scientists? They're actually using the data fit for the purpose, and the narratives they're producing are actually accurate. How do you ensure that part of it?
So we have a number of scripts that we run after data is loaded, so before it's made visible to everybody, to make sure that that everything is correct. And we also we designed, I don't know if everybody does it, but at least we designed a certain set of protocols with our data vendors so that we can also compare what they think they sent us versus what we think we loaded, just to make sure that it's the same thing. And also, I guess we're a little bit like in the sense that all of the data scientists and statisticians that use the data, they're very knowledgeable about the data. So they know exactly what to expect to see and how many patients of certain types they're expected to see and so forth. So if they see something that doesn't make sense, we would hear about it very, very, very quickly. So I guess, two parts. First, we have some protocols with data vendors. We monitor the data loads before we make data available. We make sure that everything is right. And then we also have kind of the human element where all of our data scientists and statisticians, they're very knowledgeable.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. One, we take a risk-based approach. So we've got very rigorous standards based on how we want to use the output. So, and Vitaly could tell you all sorts of stories about the scrutiny that we put some of our analyses to, because what we expect at the end is that in many cases, it's scientific evidence. And that scientific evidence has to hold up. And it's a very high standard. And coming outside the industry, into the industry, it was something that took me a little while to appreciate. But we've got now some governance around how the analytics are performed and done in certain circumstances where the controls are warranted. I'd say we also have a fairly broad and growing data literacy campaign or advocacy. So we are a data company in many respects, but we're a company of 100,000. And so for me, it's like what I tell my kids: hey, you could always do better, right? Whether it's 8th grade math or a visualization you're producing around product performance, we could always do better. And so we try to make sure that we advocate for the basics around data literacy and effective visualization and that kind of thing and analytic process. And then we have tools, right? So we've got workbenches, Data IQ and the like, where we're creating reusable components that data scientists themselves can reuse, where we've got GitHub, so you can reuse code that has been scrutinized and then sort of certified. So we try to attack it from multiple angles. And then, of course, on the intake, we make sure that whatever we take in actually lives up to what the vendor says it is going to be. You'd be surprised. Actually, you probably wouldn't be surprised if you have had some of our experience. What we purchase, and these are very, very big, large data purchases, in some ways, some of the times these companies have no idea what they've just sent us. And we can prove it. So then they have to go back and repair it. And we've actually started to think about building that kind of dynamic into how they're compensated, so that we're not just blindly buying things and hoping that it is what they say it is.
And just to add on that, also you're going through the next evolution of knowledge sharing, right? So if a similar question has been asked and analysis has been done, you don't have to redo it. They're doing a much better job of creating those communities, doing knowledge sharing across the board in terms of what can be used, so they don't have to answer the question again multiple times as such too. So that's the next evolution of knowledge management that they're doing. Question?
How did the structure of your organization evolve in the transformation? Did you start with like a tiger team and then more of a formal structure midway through, or did you organize this way out of the gate?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I'd love to talk to you about it. We have 7 seconds left. I see Tracy, our producer over there, starting to twitch. If you don't mind, I'd be happy to talk more about it off to the side for anybody who's got an interest in it, because it was a change, for sure.
10 seconds over.
See, I told you, Tracy, we'd live up to your expectations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.